Hey everyone, Tempestagi Talk is back, and we are going to do a deep dive into Skylar Diggins-Smith and a few other things regarding women's basketball and, of course, the Seattle Storm.
You have three people who are selfless like that, three people who are dangerously disciplined like that, and you have a coach that also embodies all of those characteristics. You can expect good basketball.
I love interacting with the fans. I'm excited for them to cheer for us because it's hell when you come here. I even welcome people that could be skeptical because it's new.
There's going to be a standard of excellence and discipline in everything that we do.
The Pacific Northwest, this area, how passionate they are. It's culture everywhere, but it's great culture here. That's what I want to be a part of, to compete for a championship. That's everybody's goal. And I think it's just how we go about things and habits that we create. I want to be around winners. That'll help us get closer to that.
And that's what the fans can expect. And we're going to have some fun.
Welcome to another episode of Tempestagi Talk, your local eye on the Seattle Storm. Hey, Daniel. We see Ghost has some comments. We'll get to that. But, we are part of Black Rosie Media, where we empower Black women and melanated creators in sports media. Hey, Moni. Good to see you. Moni's one of our loyal Slack followers. We appreciate you popping in. And we have a lot to get into. We are definitely going to do a deep dive into Skylar Diggins-Smith. This is, in the off season, Black Rosie Media, our team specific podcasts, we do a deep dive we go player by player. So Skylar Diggins-Smith is up. But first, at least not on Tempestagi Talk, we haven't talked about the findings of the external investigation. Talked about it a little bit with Brian Florentin on Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans. But Roberta Rodrigues is here alongside me. But before we get into it, Roberta, what's good in your world?
Hey, Erica. So happy to be back here with our Tempestagi talk. I really missed joining you. It was, Thanksgiving week. So we're all I'm excited to be back and talking Seattle Storm with you. Life has been busy when working. I've been writing a lot. Got some freelance gigs, and that's exciting. That was one of my goals for 2025. As an immigrant, it's hard to tap into this market here, so I'm very proud and excited. Updating myself on everything storm related, on the investigation, and I'm ready to dive into it with you.
Yeah, for sure. So for those keeping up at home, there was an investigation into the coaching staff. Did not say if it was one coach, all of the coaches, just a few of the coaches, but all of the coaching staff being investigated after reports of bullying and things of that nature, which we've talked about on on past episodes. But we heard from ESPN, and then also some adjacent news from Annie Costabile at the Chicago Sun-Times. The investigation was concluded with no findings of any violations by the coaching staff. And then also it was reported very shortly after the report findings that Jewel Lloyd has requested a trade out of Seattle. I think the latter, Lloyd asking for a trade, honestly, with all of the writing on the wall, we had talked about this, Roberta, especially some of her family members getting involved on social media. That part, not surprising. What I do think is interesting, I don't want to say surprising or not, we just don't really know much about what the investigation yielded other than, no findings of bullying. We've gone through this with other WNBA teams. No findings. Does that mean that everything was on the up and up? We don't know all of that much, but what were your reactions to the investigation findings and kind of the news that has come since?
I mean, none of that surprised me at all. Just based off the reporting that Annie Costabile and myself and other people have been doing on this situation, that's not surprising at all. I do think that one important factor to take into consideration that was reported by now I can't remember if it was ESPN or the Chicago Sun-Times, is that the complaint came from Jewel Lloyd. And that's something that we have been reporting here. We have been talking about here in Tempestade Talk. So that's the situation. And I've been talking to people in the industry, people here in Seattle. It seems like really nothing at all was found, not even like unintentional bullying or anything like that. And it's more insatisfaction with the way things went on the court than anything else.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's hard to know what's going on. Jewel Lloyd has not spoken about the matter. The Seattle Storm hasn't spoken on the matter, so we really don't have anything concrete to go on. It just seemed that there was definitely tension. There was definitely discontent, as we will hear when we get into some Skylar Diggins-Smith clips, particularly though from exit interviews. That's not anything that the players, that Noel Quinn as the head coach has shied away from. So there was definitely, it was a hard season in some ways.
Yeah.
Not comparative to what they had to deal with as far as their record, at least last year. But it was interesting because Kia Nurse was on the team last year, and she said that even though it was a losing team, the record wasn't where they wanted it to be, that things seemed, that like there weren't issues, they weren't having issues as a team. The frustration never bubbled over to the locker room, so to speak. And it seems almost like this season, Roberta, was the opposite of how Kia Nurse talked about the 2023 season, even though it was a losing season.
Yeah, and I think we can also go back to Gabby Williams just repeatedly saying that the reason why she went back to the Storm both last season and this season was because of the locker room and because of the relationships. So that was a shift for sure. It seems like there was a shift in culture in general. Last season wasn't a winning season comparing to this one. So there are things related to that are relevant to the situation and to how things came down to the investigation. But yeah, things were not looking good.
Well, what do you mean by that? I'm not sure what that means. What about last year is relevant to the investigation that just happened?
Like I said, last year was very much about Jewel Lloyd, and it was Jewel Lloyd's team. This year, with the way things went on the court, there was some shift in the balance of performance and who was contributing better, and because there was more on the line, there were other factors to be taken into consideration when it comes to team leadership. So all of the shifts, all of the changes, all of the roles changes had a big impact on the team chemistry. There wasn't a lot of time for the adaptation. So just having to adapt, having to flip the switch so quickly, that definitely had an impact on the team.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And we've definitely talked about it, as you said. I just wanted to make sure we were being explicit with what we were talking about. And it also is going to be an interesting way to navigate our conversation about Skylar Diggins-Smith, because she and Nneka Ogwumike, who we will talk about on our next deep dive, they are they stand out as the additions. And you think that that would be a good addition, and it was from the record perspective, but it seems like maybe there were other things afoot. But again, we're going to get into that. But first, we also have to talk about the Seattle Storm. And no one selected from the Seattle Storm for the Valkyries expansion draft. What is your insight on that?
I mean, who doesn't like to have fun with, some jokes, I mean, I don't know if there was any ulterior motive, any underlining messages that the Valkyries was trying to convey with that. Definitely don't know if there's any of that. There is the logical explanation, which is that the Storm only had unrestricted free agents, and they decided to go the Valkyries decided to go with Monique Billings, which makes sense. Moni mentioned Sue's explanation on a touch more, and it makes sense. Of course, all of the jokes and fans were like, it was fun, and like I said, I don't think there's an underlying message, but kinda there is, because you would rather pass on a whole new player when you don't have anyone on your roster, rather than getting someone who could potentially be trade capital.
Yeah, I hear where Sue is coming from, and
yeah,
I don't know if I'm buying it 100%. To Moni's point, we actually have the clip, so we're going to play that and then actually look a little bit deeper into the actual expansion draft rules, because I think Sue brought up a lot of things that, quite honestly, I had not fully realized. And so it was a very tricky expansion draft on multiple levels, including I just don't understand why they wouldn't release the protected lists. But I digress. Here is Sue Bird talking with Megan Rapinoe on a touch.
Our team got picked.
Yeah.
What's happening?
I want to do it with the captions. Hold on. I think I have a version with the captions, and I always prefer to do that because, we try to, on Black Rosie Media, be mindful, be thoughtful. I might not be able to pull it up right now. But all right, well, I'll just play the regular video. Apologies that this will not have the captions right now. I'm a little gutted, actually, because I definitely had my captions ready to go. But, the show must go on. So here again is Sue.
Our team got picked.
Yeah.
Oops.
What's happening? I don't understand why.
Drama and conspiracy.
Tell me the conspiracy. This feels targeted again. I'm being targeted a lot today.
Yeah, there's nobody from the Storm got picked. Just a little FYI, I believe the Valkyries had the opportunity, I guess, to pick one player from every team. So the max amount of players they could pick was 12. They did not have to pick. I don't know that there was a minimum. That's something that I'm trying to find out. Maybe it's 0. Maybe they didn't have to pick anybody. But point being, of course, they were going to pick players, but there wasn't some rule saying they had to pick from every team no matter what. So with that, a lot of jokes have been had on the Storm's behalf, which is cool. I don't mind opening up my social medias and seeing some trollery every now and then. But this one is a little misguided. So very quickly, when you break down the Storm roster, it goes like this. And listen, what we're about to get into, I can never detach myself from being in the Storm ownership. But at the same time, what I'm about to say, I actually don't have 100% certainty on. I'm not in the war rooms. I'm not in the conversations. I am just an investor in the Storm. With that being said, I'm gonna go out on a limb.
Give me your thoughts.
And say that they protected Jewel, Skylar, Ezzy, Gabby, Jordan, and Nneka. I'm pretty confident in that, and I'll tell you why. Nneka, as we've discussed before, did not need to be protected.
She's an unrestricted free agent who cannot be cored. Her cores have been used, therefore basically ineligible. So that was great for the Storm. Got them an extra spot. You might say that that's why they were able to protect Nika. Okay, moving on to the rest of the roster. Mercedes Russell, Sammy Wickham, Victoria Vivians, and Joyner Holmes. All of these players are unrestricted free agents. So in a sense, they're almost in this other pot. So if they were left unprotected, they're now in this other pot of players that's unrestricted free agents. And the Valkyries could only pick one.
So like league-wide.
League-wide.
Across the whole league, they can only pick one.
All the unrestricted free agents who have the ability to be cored, they could only pick one. Okay. So once they pick, now I don't know the order of events, but they clearly, the Valkyries, I'm assuming, assessed this. And once they landed on Monique Billings being the player that they wanted within, you know, on their roster, and that they wanted the ability to negotiate with and the ability to core, if it got to that, no guarantee there, it was her. I don't view this as a slap in the face to Sadie's, Sammy, Vivian's, or Joyner at all. It's just, oh, we chose Monique Billings for this. These are still very good players, very good role players, the whole nine. So it's not some big slap in the face. If anything, you could argue that the Storm front office did a great job to be set up in this way. They basically set up this roster, and I don't know if it was on purpose, but let's say it was. They basically set up a roster where you were only going to take one if you wanted to, worst case scenario, core them.
So that's Sue Bird's breakdown. I just want to read what the WNBA sent out with regard to the expansion draft. Golden State will have the opportunity to acquire a player of contract or the negotiating rights to one available player from each of the current 12 teams. So in that clip, Sue says she's not sure if there's a minimum, but the maximum that they could have picked is 12, one from each team. Okay, we're on the same page there. Then it goes into, if a player not signed to a contract for the 2025 season is selected, Golden State shall receive whatever rights to such player that the existing team would have had if the player was not selected in the expansion draft. So that would be like, you know, for the New York Liberty, you know, whatever Maureen Johannes, you know, her designation is, just as an example. Which actually, well, either way, the point is, so if you select that player in the expansion draft, you then retain whatever rights they would have had with the team that they were just under contract, or whoever had the negotiating rights. This is the part that Sue was breaking down. The Valkyries will only be able to select one player in the expansion draft who is eligible to become an unrestricted free agent following the 2024 season. So so she talked about NECA, same thing with Stewie. If the New York Liberty did not protect Stewie, which we don't know, I don't know why they wouldn't, but you don't know for sure. Maybe this is why they wouldn't. I don't know. This actually makes no sense to me as far as like a point of order, but whatever. That person, if they pick Monique Billings, or if they pick Stewie, then you can't pick Monique Billings, or vice versa, because you can only have select one player in the expansion draft who is eligible to become an unrestricted free agent following the 2024 season. Golden State may choose such a player provided that the player has not previously played pursuant to a core player contract. So actually you couldn't pick Stewie because she's been cored. She was just cored by New York for 2 or more seasons. Golden State may then designate that player as its one core player in January. So I want to stop there because Roberta, it's making it sound like you would only pick, and this is how Sue ends that clip, right? You would only pick an unrestricted free agent if you were going to designate the core. Now, let's break down why that is. Like, the reason that is because if you select them in an expansion draft December and you don't core them, then you don't have any rights to them. That's the underlying thing right here. Mm-hmm. That's what the kicker is. So, they could pick if they really wanted to, but again, like Sue said, the only reason that you would do that is if you were going to core them. Now, Well, let me stop there and get your thoughts on that little wrinkle.
The core part.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's important to go back to what Natalie Nasake said in the draft at night, which is that the type of player that they were looking for, right? They were looking for players with grit, players who basically were trying to prove something, players who were physical. But she also said that she wanted shooters, right? She wanted she wants people who are going to attack.
Yeah, I do want to get into, because I think what Golden State wants is also important, but I want to talk a little bit just about the rules of the expansion draft, without talking about the prototype, because I mean, it just seems like if unrestricted free agents can then, if they're not cored, they're still unrestricted free agents, then why not just make them ineligible for the expansion draft?
And then why not have a rule that you need to have at least one player who is not an unrestricted free agent next year in your unprotected list? Because if that was the list, it was clever by the Storm to have only UFAs, because that reduces the chances of having someone snatched from them, right? So it did make it, because again, the only player that I know that was protected was Jordan Horston, but we have like the assuming list. So assuming that the unprotected ones were the ones that we have been guessing, then the chances of someone being picked up were already so small, because it means that the Valkyries wouldn't get any unrestricted free agents from the other team, you know?
And then also think about it from Monique Billings' perspective. You think, I mean, obviously she knew that we were going into an expansion year, but also this is going to impact players in the next several seasons. But you go into a season, you finish up 2024, knowing that you are set to be an unrestricted free agent. Then you get this wrinkle now that instead of the team that you just played for coring you, which could have been the case, it would seem, for Monique Billings, now a whole nother team on the opposite side of the country is effectively has, even though you're an unrestricted free agent, the 2024 season is done. That means she should have say, right, 100% in where she's going. The only way that makes sense to me is if Golden State was able to have conversations with players. I would imagine that they must have been able to communicate somehow. But also remember, this is an expansion draft that's happening before the window for, and again, it's the expansion draft, so there's some accommodations. But I guess I just am curious to know a little bit more about this process. The more that I know, the more I realize that I don't know about the expansion draft.
The more we hear explanations, the more confusing it gets. But I think that the worst part is just how the lack of transparency. For me is something that I can't wrap my mind around it. You're
makes no sense.
Talking about players who are possibly never going to know if they were protected or not by their teams. And that gives teams so much edge and control over their future. And, it might change the way a player perceives the way that franchise treats them. I think that that's wrong. I think that players should know if they have like a chance of being drafted, of having their whole lives, turned upside down. I think that was a big miss by the league, and they need to reevaluate that and really try to think of, I can't imagine what someone's mental health must be like. I gotta say that I did talk to a few players. All of them were very nervous. There wasn't one player who I haven't talked to every player, but the players that I talked to, they were all very nervous and unsure of what their future was going to be.
This is something that has to be fixed, and we have expansion teams coming in the next handful of years. I really don't know. So I really don't know what's going on there.
Can I say just one quick thing?
Yeah.
So it's just like, we also have to take into consideration that one of the expansion drafts is going to be to a whole new country.
Right.
And like, just for me, it is like, I'm baffled by the fact that if the WNBA does not let players know, it's just disrespectful. And that's what I want to say.
It just, I don't know. And I don't know if the teams had autonomy to be like, to the protected players or to the unprotected players, to both lists, like, hey, this is what we're doing. I don't know. We don't know. It's done very differently in the NWSL. They don't, I mean, the NWSL might be late to release their schedule, but they've been through the expansion draft, so they know what's going on. Aaron, so are the Storm in a rebuild stage in 2025? I mean, that's an interesting question, and we will definitely get to that a little bit later in the episode. But now let's dive into the meat and potatoes, as it were. We're going to recap Skylar Diggins-Smith, and we already have one comment, someone making their thoughts known. And I think it's safe to say that Skylar Diggins-Smith is she's complex as a person, as a professional athlete. And I think complexity is not good or bad. It's just that. It's both and. It comes with more than just one thing. And I think that's also what makes her very dynamic. And so we're going to get into that. But let's talk a little bit just about, how she came to the Seattle Storm. What do we know, Roberta, about what it took to get Skylar Diggins-Smith here alongside Nneka Ogwumike?
I think it ties a little bit into the Aaron Woodson question, but I'm going to leave that for later. The Storm really needed someone who would support Jewell Loyd, someone who would take some of the weight from her shoulders, who would take some of the responsibilities and let Jewell a little more free or freer. That's who would give Jewell a little more room to shoot and score, because last year Jewell was carrying the load, right? She was doing everything. So they needed someone who would help Jewell be the main scorer, especially when she was doing so well score-wise last year. So the assumption was that she was going to continue on that groove, breaking records. So Skylar was a great help in terms of leading the point, so she would be able to handle the ball and distribute and be the floor general, and Jewell would be free to score. Nneka came in, and she's a great leader. She would be taking care of the paint, and she's an amazing defender, which we know is not Jewell's specialty. She has improved so much on that throughout the years. So that was the support system that Jewell wanted. And I also had sources tell me that Jewell signed off on those players and that she wanted Skylar and Nneka there. So everything was built around Jewell. And the Storm was able to bring her. That was on the first day of free agency. And that was very important because in the previous year, the Storm had a big loss in the very first day of the free agency because Stewie, who was in a restricted free agency, announced that she was going to the New York Liberty on February 1st. It was a big deal. It took a big hit on the Storm. And for a long time, the Storm only had like 4 players on their roster. And this year was the total opposite. The Storm had a huge, like a top free agent the very first day, and with Skylar Diggins-Smith. I know that they had been courting her for a while, and it's just it was a team that met what Skylar needed. It has a
Right.
practice facility. The ownership does everything for the players. That's something that is very honorable for them. Players are treated like royalty by the ownership group, and that attracts players to the Storm. So Skylar had everything she wanted at the Storm, and Jewel also had everything she wanted, including Skylar. So
Yeah.
it was supposed to be the perfect match, right?
Yeah, and that's what makes it so interesting, because when did that change? And that's what we really don't know. The investigation, at least in what was reported from the investigation, hasn't revealed that. The players themselves haven't really explicitly talked about that. Again, we've talked on the podcast that Skylar Diggins-Smith and others, Sammy Whitcomb was one of them, Noel Quinn, to say we're not performing at our best. We have that clip. Yeah, I think yes, and maybe no. I think that we talked at the Olympic break. Is this a team that is ready for a run? I think their record said maybe, but the performances weren't always coming together. I do think that things changed, and I was in Paris, and so Jules, how she was utilized, or the lack thereof, was very puzzling. It's not an easy thing for Cheryl Miller to coordinate minutes for so many powerhouse players. And it was just so interesting to hear her say, we can't win without Jewel Lloyd, and then literally not play her any minutes in the gold medal game, which they almost lost, or at least almost went to overtime, I should say. So I don't know that I think the Olympic break is very telling. And I think the way the team started out of the gate wasn't all that great. Now, again, it does take time. On Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans, we talk about that. Easy bake oven style of building chemistry is hard. And we've talked about that as well. But again, we know Jewel is involved in some of this. It seems like Skylar Diggins-Smith and Nneka Ogwumike in some ways are related, and are related to the shift, as you said, in leadership. So, but going back to Skylar, because let's first just talk about her performance. And, you talk about the Olympic break, but Roberta, what do we see in the split from Skylar Diggins-Smith with her on-court performance at the Olympic break? What was she doing before the break, and what did things look like after the break?
Yeah, so there are some splits that we can take a look into. I highly recommend the wnba stats page, but you see a big difference on her pre-All-Star and on Skylar's pre-All-Star and post-All-Star, and that means pre-Olympic break, post-Olympic break. There was a big jump in her point average from the pre to the post. So she started the season with 13.1 points per game. And then in the second half, she had 18.5 points per game. So big jump in terms of minutes. It stayed very close, 31 versus 32.
And I'm going to put them up on the screen just so folks can take a look at what
and then when you look into Jewel's point flow, she started the season with 20 points. Before the All-Star game, she had 20.1 points per game, and then post All-Star game, it was 18.8. But I think the most jarring difference is that in June, Jewel had 20 points per game. In September, she had 16 points per game. Whereas Skylar in June had 14 points per game, and then in September she had 18 points per game. So we see contrasting trends before and after the break. So Skylar and I think it has a lot to do with Skylar getting back into the groove. It's very important to note that Skylar did not play last season, and she just came from her second pregnancy, and she also went through some very complicated stuff with the Mercury. So she was just coming back to the WNBA. It was natural that she was like, ebbing and flowing early in the season. Noelle Quinn gave her a lot of grace in that sense. And in the A Touch More podcast, Sue Bird mentioned that Skylar told her that she was in the third iteration of her body, right? The pre-first pregnancy, post-first pregnancy, and second post-pregnancy. So we saw that Skylar Diggins-Smith had a progression and Jewel had a regression, and that progression and regression, when it find like the middle line where the change happened, it started with that Olympic break. I do believe that the Olympic break was a divider with this team, and it tells the story of how the season ended.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get why that's the focus. And again, pre-Olympic break, the team was in that 4 spot, if I remember correctly.
I think
Post-Olympic break, even better. They were top 4. Post-Olympic break, they were not. So, but then they did find their way to a playoff team. So there was some bounce back for whatever was happening. So again, I think the numbers and that you outlined are important, especially because this is a deep dive into Skylar Diggins-Smith. And I want us to just think about that as we continue talking about other players as well, because I think it tells a very good part of the story, but not, for me, it's just not the whole story, including, a team that was perhaps experiencing all of this turmoil. How do they then end up staying above the line, so to speak, to be a playoff team? Now they bow out in the first round. So does that mean they're a functional team? But again, I think these are all things that are worth mentioning because we can talk about them throughout the offseason. So yeah. And now I see people talking about Skylar's leadership. And again, I do think she is a complex person. And is she given the benefit of the doubt compared to a Diana Taurasi? I think we can all say no. And those two were teammates. So that must have been interesting, to say the least, and didn't necessarily go well. But she's a firecracker. She is a passionate person. And actually, both you and I asked her about her leadership in her exit interviews in one fashion or another, which of course, in hindsight now on the other side of the investigation is really telling. But I want to, before we get into our thoughts, and I see some of the comments from Moni, from Amber, we're going to get into all of these, but let's first hear from Skylar, because I think it's important to have athletes speak for themselves when they offer quotes. So these are a few snippets. These are the questions that Roberta and I asked in exit interviews for the Seattle Storm. And these are Skylar's remarks to thinking about her leadership style, and also what she's going to take with her moving forward.
Do you consider yourself a natural leader?
I do consider myself a natural leader. I feel like I've been a leader of this team all year. And to me, leadership is not just about position. It's about action. It's about how you conduct yourself. It's about the work that you put in. Can you lead by example? Can you be a professional? Can you be prompt? Can you do the hard things? And would you follow yourself? And I say yes to all those things. I played 42 games this year. The most games I've played, 40 games in a regular season after coming back off of maternity leave. That was the biggest accomplishment for me. And it was for the people that work with me every day, starting with Noe. Like, I came here to play for Noe and with NECA, and to be aligned with leadership like NECA, who's doesn't get as much credit as she should for the progression of this league and where we are today. Like Nneka could be very well our next commissioner. You know what I'm saying? Everybody would be fine with that. And what she does. And so to be aligned with that kind of leadership, I always wanted to, I've been in the locker room with Nneka, but you know, like I always say, in perpetuity, to be able to share this experience with her. I don't know if I've been able to make it through this year in that sense, just going through all the transformations and all the change if I didn't have somebody like that, you know.
I want to stop right there because I find it interesting that she said, I wanted to play for Noe and with Nneka. Now, we talked about Skylar's coming to Seattle. A lot of the conversation on her entry involved Jewell Loyd.
Mm-hmm.
When we got to the other side, not so much.
Yeah, and we see, I always, for me, it's always fascinating. She started the season saying, this is Jewell Loyd's team. This is Jewell Loyd's team. And then at the end, she says, I saw myself as a leader from the start. It really shows that, you know, things really changed and it shifted. And I brought up the numbers. The main reason why I brought up the numbers is because I believe that a lot of this relationship contention, all of the conflict, started with the performances, like who was taking more shots, who was taking less shots. So she came into this team with the sign off from Jewell Loyd, and everyone was in agreement that Jewell Loyd was the leader of the team. But her leadership style changed. Her leadership style drew people to her. That's what it seems. And it changed the culture. That's why I say that it kind of flipped the switch in the Seattle Storm culture.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm reacting because, and I mean this matter-of-factly, Jewell Loyd as a leader and Skylar Diggins-Smith as a leader are, I don't even know if they're polar opposites. They're on different charts.
Yeah.
They're on
very different
charts.
Completely different charts, completely different way to approach things. And that, you know, there was a clash. You have like two players who shot selection. That's a great point, Moni. That's a great point.
Yeah.
And like they come from, it's crazy because they both went to the same school. They both went to the same program. And I know that both have different relationships with their programs. Completely different human beings, completely different, players. And it seems like their leadership styles didn't click.
Which is so, I mean, I don't know these people personally, right? We cover teams, we cover a glimpse of their collective holistic lives. We cover their profession. It just, if you would have told me going into the 2024 season that the leadership styles of Jewell Loyd and Skylar Diggins-Smith would be toxic, I wouldn't have believed you. I have not seen any indication from their career trajectories that they wouldn't be able to coexist, especially when that seemed to be an impetus for Skylar Diggins-Smith going to Seattle. And I say this on Gotta Get Up. I say this on Tempestagi Talk. You need a point guard.
You do.
Not a hybrid, not a two that's holding over. And that's what made it difficult for Jewell to be a leader in the 2023 season. She was definitely doing that with her scoring. She led the whole league in scoring. But that was a struggling team. And honestly, it reminds me of sometimes the flack that Tina Charles gets. Tina Charles is also not the same kind of leader as Skylar Diggins-Smith. I think she's more on the side of Jewell Loyd, as they are leaders in my estimation, that they lead by example. And they expect that if they're leading by example, that people will follow their example with minimal words expressed. They're not going to overly communicate if they don't have to. That's my read. That's my read on Lloyd and Tina Charles. Skylar Diggins-Smith is the opposite of that. She is very comfortable communicating, and similar to myself, she will communicate audibly, not necessarily directed at anyone, but a thought that's crossing her mind, especially one where she's frustrated. A word, a sentence, a phrase will pop out of her mouth because that's what she's feeling in that moment. And it's a cathartic release, but it's not necessarily directed at anyone. That's my take on Skylar. So this is interesting. I love this because I do think that they're related in this scenario. So I do think their leadership styles are different. I also think, and I like this because when we get to the root of what seems to be happening, again, we don't really know. I don't know when we will know, if ever, but accountability was at least a part of what went wrong, Roberta, for Seattle.
Definitely. And going back to what you're saying about leadership styles, in management class and leadership class, we know the difference between a manager and a leader, right? And in sports, sometimes people confuse.
They conflate them.
Sometimes people confuse like the leader in points with leader of the team.
Yeah.
And sometimes the person who is the best scorer is not the best leader, and that's okay.
Totally fine.
Really okay.
Totally.
And going to the accountability part, acknowledging that and being okay with that makes such a difference on team dynamics. So you have Skylar, who at the end of the day ended up, she was not team leader, but she ended up being she was not leader in points, but she ended up taking a role of leader. Again, all we can do is wonder, right? Was that something that Jewel thought about? Is this something that Jewel thinks about or that she understands? We don't know. And it should be something that they would have to talk about. And that seems to be where it didn't happen.
And that is where, and we're going to talk more about Skylar. We're going to hear more from Skylar shortly, but that is where our conversation about the Seattle Storm is relevant in all of this. Because yes, we're talking about Skylar Diggins-Smith, but it's hard to talk about her, Roberta, and everyone who's joining us. Thank you so much. We appreciate y'all joining us live. That's where it's hard to not have this conversation because Skylar Diggins-Smith, so much a part of that. Again, her leadership style, very out. It's very out in the open. It's not ambiguous. It is loud at times. It is raw. And I don't know that it was realistic to assume that as a point guard, number one, as a veteran, number two, and just as who she is to her core, that Skylar Diggins-Smith wasn't going to find a way to be a leader on this team. And I think that, Nneka, obviously a leader, just natural born, eldest child, whatever you want to say. She is a leader.
Madam President.
Right, exactly. And you heard future commissioner. I love that that's making its rounds.
Me too.
Glass, and I loved it. And I love that it's making its rounds. And so what is it about those three leaders? Because I don't want to put this, I don't think it's fair to put this on any of the three players that we're about to talk about. What was it about Nneka Ogwumike, Skylar Diggins-Smith, and Jewel Lloyd at Seattle that made it a toxic place to be, to the tune that Jewel Lloyd now wants out? What was, and I do think performance and accountability had something to do with it. And we kind of talked about that in our deep dive for Jewel Lloyd. But here's what I think I know about Skylar. She's not going to let a ship that she's on sink.
Exactly. Yep.
And she don't care who she hurts. emotionally, maybe. Her job.
I almost.
Sorry, because I was like, let me be clear. Like, I don't out here, throwing elbows to her intentionally. I don't think she is. Her main objective is not to deliver a message with feelings at the forefront. I think NECA can deliver a very firm message and consider feelings. I think she does a great job at doing that. That's my read on it. Sky that's not her default. I'm not saying she can't do it. That's just not her default.
Yeah.
And then you have Jewel. I feel like her leadership style, her first instinct is to observe and not necessarily to react or respond. I think NECA's maybe middle of the road, and then Skylar is going to react and respond and then maybe sit back.
Yeah.
So but again, what was it at Seattle that made that not work? And we talked about it. If you say it's Jewel's team, but what does that mean? Because she's not the point guard. So it can't be her team when you're running plays. She can be the go-to player.
Yeah.
If you're running sets, but she literally, it's not her, the ball is in the point guard's hand, aka Skylar Diggins-Smith. If she's not the leading scorer, then maybe she's not always going to be that go-to. You have to feed Ezzy. You have to feed NECA for that Seattle Storm team to be successful. So, but again, that goes back to what we've said. If the coaching staff, but more so because some of this is a front office thing when you recruit. What are you promising players, and can you deliver on that? What conversations were had or weren't had that made it so that this was a no-fly zone to the point where now we're seeing Jewel want out?
Yeah. So Jewel was supposed to be the face of the franchise, right? When Sue left, when Stewie left, Jewel was the face of the team, the franchise player. But it was not expected that it was going to be Jewel, because it was expected that Stewie was going to stay. So even though, it was like, oh, okay, Jewel is going to be our person now. So I feel like Jewel was not prepared for everything that unfolded on the team since Sue Bird retired. And she was put in a very complicated situation, and no one really set up her expectations correctly. She had, again, she signed off on free agency. She was actively helping making decisions for the team. And then she became like the third player when it comes to drawing plays, and we talked about this, and I don't know if that's the point that you were trying to get to, Erica, which is local culture, Seattle culture. Seattle has a culture that, we have the Seattle freeze, you have the let's just let things happen and be passive aggressive about it. That's how things happen here. Jewel has been here for a very long time, her whole career. So my feel, and from talking to several people, related to the situations in so many different levels, there was a lack of setting. The expectations were not set properly, and the undertones of lack of cultural awareness in the city of Seattle, and the people in the Seattle Storm from Seattle, had a big impact on it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it definitely relates to how the Seattle Storm season now, in hindsight, is perceived. how much of that was what was happening on or off the court? Because like me, I mean, not everyone that plays for the Seattle Storm, no one, right, is from Washington. So like, I don't know how well, except for Sammy. Sammy has the most, the most connection to Washington State, and has played for the organization before. So I hear what you're saying. I think that plays into how this is perceived or even talked about in media or on social media. And I don't know that you can say that that is the underpinning here when it comes to these particular players, these particular professionals, and why it didn't work. I do think I do also think that the coaching staff, now they might not have been guilty of bullying. And this is what makes it tough being a coach, because coaches are effectively, to your point, in the hierarchy of a franchise. They're more mid-level managers than they are leaders, because they have to drive results even though they're not the ones playing on the court. And for the most part, they're not the ones making the rosters, right? I mean, we do have some GMs, but let's just, for the sake of argument and in the context of the Seattle Storm, Noelle Quinn and her coaching staff, well, again, Pokey's a little bit of an outlier, but they don't make the roster. They don't. I mean, Noelle Quinn kind of also went on record saying she would have made a different decision in the WNBA draft. So it puts them in a tough spot. And the reason that you're in that spot is because your job is to drive results of the roster that you are given. I think we can have an a conversation as to how effective this coaching staff was in doing that. Now, does that mean they should be fired? I don't think in this context it means that. It doesn't mean, it means it's a possibility, but I think it's worth having a conversation. You and I have talked about this before. I think Noe has potential to be a great coach. Is she a coach? Is she a top 3 considering 2024? Because we got a whole bunch of coaching changes. Was she a top 3 coach last year? No. I've said that before. We've talked about it. Was she going to be coach of the year candidate for me? I mean, if it's a list of 10 people, she's in the upper part, or 12, I guess. But she's not. When you have Sandy Brondello, when you have Cheryl Reeve, she's not making that top.
I love that we disagreed on that in the other part, that I was like, Noe was a coach of the year candidate for me, and you were like, what?
White, Cheryl Reeve, and Sandy Brondello. Who's she knocking off?
The first half of the season, the first part, I was like, oh, something's cooking here. But then there was that part, like when things started to go downhill, then I was like, no.
I mean, and those are the growing pains. Cheryl Reeve has been through that. Sandy Brondello has been through that. Noelle Quinn is having to do this as a head coach for a franchise that has already won 4 WNBA championships.
Exactly.
Sandy didn't do that. Cheryl Reeve didn't have to do that. Cheryl Reeve got 4, but she didn't have to go be a new head coach, a first-time head coach for an established franchise. So there's a lot going on, but we're gonna head back to Skylar, because there are a few little nuggets, including how she wants to translate what she learned about herself as a leader, which I think is worth exploring as well.
With me.
What is that next process like for you and your leadership, evaluating and assessing what happened here in Seattle in the context of this season for you and your leadership? I just want to pause for the cause. I asked her this question before we knew about the investigation and some of what went down. So what you're going to hear, she knows what went down in the locker room. I just thought it was an interesting question to ask someone who seemed to have a journey throughout her leadership. So just putting that out there.
I mean, it's going to be some reflection, obviously. Feel like I made a lot of strides in my leadership. Just even the connection that I had with my coach, and being very intentional about that was something that wasn't present the last time I was on the floor. And so just being very intentional about coming here with no ego. I know I wasn't the franchise player of this team. But it's just really, to me, was a body of work that they didn't know me personally. Noel didn't know me personally. Pokey didn't really know me personally. But I think my body of work spoke for itself, and that's the type of people that they wanted around this organization and to be aligned with this organization. And so naturally, I think that my reputation preceded me in that sense, and just trying to make sure that, I'm a positive person, but I'm also a real person. I'm okay with criticism. I'm okay with talking about change. I'm okay with uncomfortable conversations. I'm fine with having those conversations because that's the only way you get better. And so I can honestly say I brought no ego into this situation, but I really wasn't in a position to really lead like this at first because it's not my team. But I think by my actions and how I conducted myself, and just how can I continue to be a better pro? How can I be a better teammate? How can I be a better leader? TBD. I'm healing. I'm not healed. It's a process, but I'm definitely open to that, and then just reflecting on being a mama too, for a year or so, and what that meant, trying to navigate that kind of like work-life balance here, and wearing those hats and how that meant for me, how I approached this team, trying to be more delicate maybe than I would have been in the past, and kind of like a nurturing spirit. I didn't have to mother anybody. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like having that disposition, I think, helped me as a leader and how it translated. And it may not have translated to everybody. There's no doubt in that. I know I may not have been everybody's cup of tea in that locker room or whatever case may be. People have relationships formed from the past, whatever. Excuse me, but I felt like I brought a lot of value to this organization this year. And I want to continue to do that, this last year in my contract.
I would just like to point out that the clips that you heard from Skylar Diggins-Smith were in response to questions asked by your co-hosts of Tempestagi Talk.
Yeah.
And we got a lot, again, especially like in real time. I think Moni said this in the comments. In real time, there was a lot. Like the whole exit interviews, there was a lot of nuggets. We got to get to Sammy's comments. We got to get
Gabby.
to Mercedes didn't even show up. Like we have a lot to talk about. And that goes back to the question about, is this a rebuild? Aaron?
Yeah.
I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it throughout the off season. My gut right now, and I hate this term when we heard it in New York, but it seems like an inevitable hybrid rebuild is happening. And I don't think it's something that was planned, but it is inevitable, especially if you have, as we just heard from Skylar Diggins-Smith, when she says franchise player, I think we all knew who she was talking about. And she said it in a way very matter-of-factly. Again, we're on the other side of the investigation, but we've said it. How many times have we said it? This was Jewel's team. Mm-hmm. She's the franchise player. She's the face. She's the one who's been there since being drafted. And something changed. Skylar said she used her hand to say, I wasn't a talkative leader at first. Not my franchise. I'm not the face of the franchise, not my team, not my locker room, not my teammates. But over time, she said it multiple times, that her body of work spoke for itself. And the only thing that I can surmise from all of that, Roberta, is that at some point in time, if you go back to the clip of Skylar Diggins-Smith when she got into that altercation with DT, verbal, I'm just going to put that out there. It was a verbal altercation. You see her tapping her foot before she gets up to talk. And in my mind, in the movie that is looping in my mind, Skylar Diggins-Smith got to a point where tapping her toe to try and stay quiet wasn't enough. She saw this team with potential, with leadership, with skill, with a pedigree of winning, going on a track that she felt was not good. And she was tired of tapping her foot in silence, and she decided to say something.
Yeah. And, I think that talking to media members here, it was And it was a different situation even for media members, and there was some questioning of how that would affect the locker room. Was like, is Ezzy gonna respond to such direct and not as like, you know, uh this kind of leadership, being used to Sue Bird and last year kind of being Jewel Lloyd. Is this something that the locker room would absorb? It's interesting when you when you watch these clips in hindsight.
Yep.
It answers so much, and
Yep.
it tells so much. And I think that when I asked that question, if Skylar saw herself as a natural leader, she didn't even think to in order to respond. She was like, yes, I do. And you saw someone mention here that Moni mentioned that the coaches agreed with Skylar and NECA. A feeling that I have is that the coaches were missing that kind of leadership coming from the team. I feel like that, and I said I'm gonna use this word, basketball wise, not personality wise. They needed some aggressiveness on the court, and they needed that power. I feel like coaches needed that. That didn't happen last season. It happened this season, and look where the team got. You got back to the playoffs. And not to quote Skylar, in this league, if you want to win, that's how you show up.
Yep.
You look at the take a look at the New York Liberty. Take a look at the Las Vegas Aces. Are those teams that play softly? They are not. They are aggressive teams. Look at the Minnesota Lynx, the big surprise this year that got to the final. They are not soft teams. Cheryl Reeve is not a soft person. Look at the Connecticut Sun. It's a team that's known for being very physical. And I feel that Skylar and NECA brought that to the team. And the coaches might have identified this coaching staff is very cerebral. Like we said, I don't think Noe's right there yet to be coach of the year, but she has what it takes to get there. And I feel that this push, that this switch that came from Skylar and NECA, I feel that she feels that it's going to help her get there. Having two players who fully trust her is going to support her in getting to the next level, especially when you consider that first she was not hired as a head coach first. She took over for a coach who retired mid-season.
Yep.
The team that she got had Sue Bird, 20-year veteran. She was the leader of the team, and Noe stayed there for that period. So you now have two players who put you on the who see you in the role of leader. I think that's why people have this. I think that's what changed. I feel that Noe wanted that change, wanted the team to be a little more aggressive on the court, wanted the team to have more of that, more of the feeling. Remember when NECA said that Noe was a gangster? and then Percy asked her, do you consider yourself a gangster? And Noe was just like, matter of fact, yes, I do.
She's from freaking California, man.
So I feel that she missed that. I feel like that's what happened.
That was supercharged in her. She was working, to your point, played in Seattle on the coaching staff at Seattle, and then she gets this player that is like, well, two really, that are ready to go to war. And Pokey is intense also. So yeah, that's an interesting. And again, we're going to keep going through all of the players. We are going to start winding down here. If you have questions that we didn't address, put them in the chat now. We're going to do a quick rundown of what you need to know about things happening overseas before we do that. But now is your chance. Get your questions in for us. But Poeta, we have so much more to talk about when it comes to the Seattle Storm team and the dynamics. I want to talk about NECA on our next episode. But we also know that Seattle Storm players are playing basketball actively right now. So let us know. What do we need to know? What's happening around the world? Let's start with the players, and then we'll get into some topics like the WNBPA and stuff like that. And but let's start with Gabby Williams and Sammy Whitcomb. What's going on with them?
Yeah, so of course there are so many games, so many tournaments going on. I'm gonna try to keep this as quick as possible. Gabby Williams is playing with Fenerbahce, which is a European powerhouse, and they're only one of two undefeated teams in the Euro League. She's playing the same team as Tina Charles, so it's Gabby Williams, Tina Charles, Ariel Atkins, Emma Misseman. How can that go wrong?
I miss seeing Emma playing the W, but I digress.
Yeah. I've been watching their games, and oh my god, it feels so good to watch Emma play. It's like amazing. So they have this powerhouse of a team. Gabby has been doing well. Of course, Tina and Emma take the charge in points. Gabby, of course, a great defender. She has some amazing games. EuroLeague, it's already in the second part of the second round of the tournament. Soon we're going to have the playoffs. It's a must watch, and all games are free on YouTube. It's like, I am lucky that I work from home, and sometimes I'm only responding emails. So I'm responding emails, and then I have Emma Misseman, Tina Charles, Ariel Atkins, and Gabby Williams playing right in front of me. I absolutely love that life. And another performance that we want to highlight is that Samuel Whitcomb with Bendigo, I think Bendigo Spirit in Australia, had a 30 piece, and she almost had a triple W in the Women's National Basketball League. So 35 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists in an 86-80 win over Townsville Fire. It was she is on the same team as Veronica Burton and Mariana Tolo. The Townsville Fire doesn't have any it's a good team, but doesn't have any big WNBA names. So it was Lauren Cox is on Townsville Fire, but it was a hell of a performance by Sammy Whitcomb. Really good to see. Unrestricted free agent, And she expressed that very clearly in the exit interviews, that she's going to explore free agency. I think she's such a good addition to any team. She's not only efficient, she's also a leader, and she brings that energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's explosive on the court.
Yeah.
She's a leader. I think that by with her actions, but in a different way. So I think she's going to be a good addition.
Yeah, I think we saw that at the Olympics. Is just what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Australian national team. I got to catch up with her a few times. But we're going to run through things because I want to get us out of here soon. But the WNBA and WNBPA announced that they have had their first preliminary CBA meeting. Not really much coming from there, other than they did have that meeting. I have sources telling me that the WNBPA was really pushing to have meetings as soon as possible. And I think that they probably would have liked to have a few more by the end of the year. But there's a lot going on. I will say, including, of course, an expansion draft. So it's good to see that things are moving forward. Very curious to see how things are going to move forward. And we're going to have to do a deeper dive into this at another point in time.
Yeah.
You broke the news earlier in the season that Pokey Chapman had been talking to the Brazilian national team. And what are the updates there? She was first brought on after some of your reporting as a consultant. But now what's the latest?
She has been officially named head coach of the Brazilian national team. Of course, I am super excited because Brazil, she's only the second woman to be the Brazilian national team head coach. She's the first Black woman to be the Brazilian national team head coach, which is absolutely insane when you think about a country as Brazil, but I digress. And, first off, it doesn't mean that she's leaving the Seattle Storm. Today, we had the introductory press conference, and I asked her, I was like, do you think that, because her first big commitment is the America Cup in June, and I was like, do you think that's going to impact your role with the Seattle Storm? To which she replied that she was very open and transparent, both with the CBB, which is the Brazilian Federation, and the Seattle Storm. Everyone knows what's happening. She said that she wants to think one thing at a time. That's more long term, but she's still with the Seattle Storm. Of course, she's in the. She continues as an assistant head coach and associate GM. Pokey is married to a Brazilian person. She has coached Erica Souza and Clarissa dos Santos. She is familiar with the meetings, and she said that she can, and all in the press conference, she said that she's very excited to work with Camila Cardoso. The press conference was really good. You could tell that everyone in Brazil is very excited because of her history with women's basketball, because she brings it feels like for many people, it feels like a breath of fresh air, considering everything that went on in Brazil recently. The former head coach left in the middle of this horrible situation where his right-hand man posted a thing, anti pro-life thing on his Instagram, and the coach is very right-wing, was very anti everything that involves the players, women's rights. So players got very upset about that. I was also the first person to report that they were firing the person who made the first pro-life posts, and that he was stepping down, and that the head coach was stepping down.
Yeah, I've been right there as you've been reporting this, and I'm really glad that we have a front row seat now here at Tempestade Talk. And again, we're gonna have to get into it more. But before we close, just want to let everyone know, if you haven't already subscribed, head over to Beehive, and we have the Women's Basketball Roundup newsletter, also the Gold Medal Dispatch, something that I started for Paris 2024 that will continue on as we get ready for Milano Cortina 26, which will be the Winter Olympics. But that will be a digest, a newsletter that will go out about bi-weekly or twice a month up until the next Olympic Games. But we would love your support. Also, if you are looking to start a newsletter, check out Beehive. We will have a affiliate link in our show notes once we wrap here, but it's just a great way to support Black Rosie Media at no additional cost to you. So I'm going to be talking about Beehive. I've been testing it out, learning some really cool things. Like, for example, did you know that if you subscribe to one of our free newsletters, you can actually download a app directly to your smartphone, so you don't even have to wait to open your email. You can get the latest newsletter directly to your home screen on your smartphone. Cool. Yeah, all through Beehive. Cool. So we will definitely be talking a little bit more as that goes on. Anyway, so we appreciate everything everything that Roberta has been able to contribute to Tempestade Talk. Again, the Pokey Chapman news we'll get into a little bit more as we continue in the off season. We also know that the holidays are coming up. Of course, Thanksgiving kind of got us started all the way now through the new year and Kwanzaa. So we will be doing our best to give you updates and to have original content for you. But in the event that we are not able to record, the women's basketball roundup is where you can find news regarding all women's basketball. But of course, we have experts covering the New York Liberty and the Seattle Storm. We also will have a section in the newsletter for when we know when our next recording is. So you can check out the newsletter, have the dates there. And of course, follow us and subscribe on YouTube. And that's how you can find us. But for Roberta Rodrigues, Erica L. Ayala, and thank you as always for tapping in to Tempestade Talk as part of Black Rosie Media. The next episode of Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans, will be on the other side of the Christmas holiday and likely also Tempestade Talk. But again, we'll have all of that in the newsletter. So, all right, everyone, thank you so much. Really good conversation, really important conversation. And somehow, Roberta, it's just the beginning.
Yeah, it's just the beginning. I'm excited that we're getting to January, because if I'm not wrong, January 21st, teams can start to negotiating. So that's going to be so fun.
Yes. And before that, we'll actually get to see some of your very own Seattle Storm players in Unrivaled in Miami. So stay tuned on how you can support Black Rosie Media's coverage of Unrivaled and all that jazz. But for Roberta Rodrigues, my name is Erica L. Ayala, your founder of Black Rosie Media, and we wish you a good night, a happy holiday, safe travels, all of the things, and we'll see you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. I have to change that outro to